the wind shifts really is what kind of haunts the burn boss, especially if you're burning in light, flashy fuels and the grass. And I found that the smaller your unit is, the less margin for error you have when the wind does shift, because you can really flop into suppression mode almost spontaneously, and then the wind, it'll shift back and you're back into prescribed fire mode, and then it shifts again, and then you start thinking, well, maybe we should just kind of, sometimes you just got to shut the thing down. But especially in light, flashy fuels, really the winds can play havoc with you.
I've had experience in the same sort of situations, and again in sagebrush grass, which I consider a flashy fuel, especially during our spring burns. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, is to orchestrate the burn such that you don't end up in a position where you're just having to sprint fire down a road to burn off. And I can tell just by your guys' reactions that occasionally happens to you. And it's a hard thing to do, but and maybe it's pre-positioning people because it seems like it happens every time in those light, flashy fuels. And as a burn boss, you don't want to try to get into that situation where you're having to hurry up and burn out a little section to keep the fire in the unit, because that's where you end up running into problems.
I remember doing a burn in Point Reyes in 1997. It was right along Highway 1, pretty busy highway corridor in California. And we started at one end of the unit based on the forecast and based on our observed weather, and we started burning, and we didn't get but 20, 30 feet, and the wind shifted from the other direction. We had to sprint down the highway and start burning from the other end to catch that thing before it went outside the unit. And like has been said, the wind shifts and those lighter, flashier fuels, the grass and the brush, they can really make you have to reconsider what you had planned for the day. You know, when you're burning on ridges, especially near communities, you got to be real cognizant of the upper level winds, the 20-foot winds and higher, because they're going to loft your firebrands. And the other thing it made us think about too is our mechanical thinning projects that we had going around that community. Maybe we need to expand those boundaries a little bit to give us a little bit more of a comfort level burning around those houses.
Recently, you know, there's been a huge emphasis on burn plans and burn plan templates and doing these beautiful burn plans that are 80 pages long where you spend all winter thinking about what the fire is going to do. And that's really good, but the only problem is you get in your mind, because the fire hasn't occurred yet, you think you know what's going to happen because you spend so much time planning, and you know, you do your behave runs and you get your air photos out and all that stuff, and you think you sometimes come into that burn with a mindset, this is what the burn's going to do, and this is the worst case that can happen. I got it all figured. Well, and sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes things do change. You know, you go on a wildfire and you don't have a plan, at least the first day or two. You're just winging it, and you're reacting very quickly to a dynamic situation that's expected. But sometimes lately I've seen people, the burn plans are so detailed, and you're looking down at the burn plan going, well, the burn plan says I have to do this, and the burn plan says I have to have 3 crews over here and 2 crews over here. Well, you get on the burn and things change. And that's this whole unexpected business is sometimes I'm not so sure that a really totally detailed burn plan isn't maybe directing people to think not about keeping them from really thinking about unexpected occurrences, because you get so dialed in, and of course there's so much pressure now that did you follow the burn plan? I mean, that's the first thing that happens when something screws up in a fire. Well, sometimes you try to follow the burn plan, but you might allocate your resources differently, or you might do something differently, and I think it's still important to have flexibility to be able to build flexibility into your burn plan so you can deal with the unexpected and don't tie yourself in. But it's, to me, especially like I said, our burn plan in Region 4 used to be really simple, and now we've adopted a more complex one, and I'm not sure. It's good, but it's not so good either.
Sounds like you're describing a false sense of predictability.
A little false sense of predictability.
Andy brings up a good point about writing burn plans, and You know, it's gotten to the point where they have to be detailed and there has to be a lot of information in them, but I'm always cautious about getting myself in a box where I say I'm going to have 3 engines over on this line and 4 engines over here. I'll say this is what I need to hold this burn in total, and then leave that up to the holding specialist and decide where he needs those resources. And that's a real good point for folks who are starting out writing burn plans is yeah, follow the policy and follow what's expected of you, but be careful about writing yourself into a box. One thing I always like to remember, I kind of keep in the back of my mind whenever I'm out on a burn or a fire use or even a wildfire, is when I make a change or a decision, is my rationale, I always think, how is this going to sound in a court of law? And is it going to pass the red face test if something goes wrong here? And if I'm able to answer that to my satisfaction, then I usually feel pretty good about the decision.
One of the things I learned in one of those cases where I had some bonus acres added to the burn, and I'll be the first one to say it. I think one of the things I learned as a burn boss is that on multiple operational period burns, I mean, the ones that you go out and light and you're done are fairly straightforward, and you have some monitoring that takes place afterwards. On the multiple day events, like what you guys deal with in the timber, I'd suggest that when you write the prescription for that event, you're really concentrating on the worst case scenario and the fire burning during the hottest part of the day. So at least the ones that I've written for multi-day burns, we're always out of prescription, usually on the cool end, overnight. And that may be as much of an issue as being out of prescription on the hot end. Talking about getting to the bonus acres part, which you're all waiting for, I know. Well, one of the things I learned was to make sure that you have identified specific areas for that night crew to concentrate on. If you, as the burn boss or the ignition person or the holding specialist, you're transitioning with that night crew or engine or whatever resources you have out there, pass that information on. As a burn boss, you want to make sure that you identify those critical holding areas that you don't want to lose. In the instance of our escape, we had issues with smoke on the road and issues with trying to keep fire out of an area that we didn't want to burn for wildlife reasons. And the smoke on the road took precedence over that, and the area that we wanted to leave unburned for wildlife burned. And I don't think, as a burn boss, I probably made the wildlife fire exclusion area high enough as a priority during my evening briefing for those folks. So that was one thing I learned. Highlight those critical areas and identify specific tasks that you want those night shifts to take care of.
This is a scenario or situation where actually we're in prescription, but we were right on, kind of on the edge on the hot end, and there was definitely a transition going on from an onshore to an offshore pattern, which in that part of the world over on the coast near Stinson Beach, California, indicates some sort of gravity wind or foehn wind was transitioning. But we went ahead and took our final weather before we decided to light our test burn, and we were still in prescription. I think our humidity was about getting down into the mid to low 30s. Our cutoff was 30%, and so that's kind of on the hot end of prescription in that country. And as soon as we lit our test burn in the grass, one of those part of that easterly flow sort of surfaced and just pushed that fire, fortunately within the unit, but kind of rapidly with fire whirls coming out of it. And I was, thinking that there's homes across the street are worth more money than I'll make in my career. And I know Dan and I talked about our escape route was essentially driving down south on I-5 to Mexico, we would have lost that. We would have lost that burn. There was really miles to just bag it and just drive away. Because, but what we did, fortunately, the wind shifted back and the fire laid down, and we just put it out immediately. You know, at about 3 or 4 acres within the unit. And it's one of those things that, yeah, okay, we were on paper in prescription. But in both our gut feelings before that were telling us, I don't know, we should really light this thing. And I think it might have been a lot of people thinking that, but we've kind of gotten that groupthink mode, and okay, everything's okay. Let's go ahead and give it a test burn. And one thing you can use in that scenario or situation is that kind of helps validate your prescription on that hot end. Maybe our humidity was too low. Maybe we should have moved it up to 35 instead of 30, kind of taking that information and then applying it to future prescription development in those areas.
To follow along with what Ben said, right before we lit the test fire, I had called the Weather Service and asked them, are you sure you're not forecasting a red flag today? Because it sure doesn't seem like we're in good here. And he said, oh no, you should be fine where you're at. And so we lit the test fire, and the lesson from Ben's story is that we picked a spot for the test fire where it was pretty easy to shut it off in a hurry. And we checked our equipment before we lit the test fire. We made sure all our hoses were working, and that's probably what kept us out of trouble. And then the continuation of that story, the next day we came out and burned the unit with no problems. The weather had changed, and we were fine. So sometimes, it's hard sometimes when you're out of prescription, you got everyone standing there to say no, but you got to do it. You can't burn out of prescription. And that happened a year or two earlier on another burn in Golden Gate National Recreation Area in the Muir Woods. We had brought crews from out of state, actually. Alpine Hotshots had come from Colorado. We had the county fire departments there. There was a couple of the local city fire departments and the national park and the state park people. And they're all there. They're all ready to go. And down in the trees where they're spinning the weather, the winds were within prescription. But up on the ridge tops, out of the trees, the winds were probably 5 miles above the prescription. And we took a look at what we were doing and the values around us. That, like Ben implied, there's this is Marin County, California, where every home there is worth $500,000 and up. And if you lose a burn and burn down a house there, your escape route is I-5 to Mexico.
One of the toughest things for a younger burn boss to learn to do is you get excited, you get everybody out on the unit, and you really want to burn. One of the toughest times I had was working with a trainee burn boss who really was more than a trainee, but sometimes he acted like a trainee. But anyways, we were right on the edge of the prescription, and the weather forecast came out, and it was obvious that we're in prescription now, but by the heat of the day, we were probably going to go out. And we had all these resources here, and we had the county here and all this stuff. And I go, you just got to walk away. You go, you can't. I go, it's really hard, and it's discouraging, and everybody's wound up and ready to go, but you just got to walk away. And the thing is, 90% of the time, you probably could have burned and been fine, and you would have been an exciting afternoon. But it's okay to walk away and come back another day. Then you got to look at the success of the whole program on the forest and in the region. A lot of times when you do have escapes, it's when people decide, well, we just want to get this one done, and that affects not only your forest but other places. And so you do got to try to stick to the prescription.
One fire use we had, Dan alluded to this, but 2003, last fall, along the Sierra front, we had a lot of fire use fires going, and we'd had them going from, we had them, they started about in July, the end of July, and this was in October, and the burns had been going on, a lot of smoke for those months. valley and even over into Nevada was impacted with the smoke. We had the mud complex. It was doing excellent. It was doing exactly what we wanted to. It was coming, it could have gone on for another couple of months, but just with everything that had happened and all of the smoke, we decided to shut it down so that the people, so we could burn when we needed to, and then next year do the fire use thing again. People were very, the more we educated people and the more we had people out in Little Vistas and educated them on fire use, they were very good about it. But another thing, it impacted deer hunting season, which is a major time for people to be out in the woods in that area, and our fire use fires had closed down a large area that people hunted. But people were still really good with it, and they appreciated it, so we decided to shut it down while we were still ahead. Sometimes it's really hard to make the decision. It's doing really good, the burn is, but then we have to look into the future and say, do we want to do this more? So it's a tough decision, but you have to make those.
Could you say a little more on what you learned that you think that people really need to pay attention to from that experience?
Monitor the public, see where they're at, what their thresholds are, because they're, sad but true, that they're an important part of our prescribed burning and fire use programs. So they play a major role in it, so we do really have to monitor that.
You got to take care of the public. Ultimately, they're the ones that are paying the bills for this. And we found at Yosemite and other places I've worked too that the more time you can spend with the public to educate, inform, and at least notify them of what you're doing and what you're about and what you're hoping to accomplish, they're a little more understanding and a little more appreciative of the effort. You're always going to have people who criticize you and who don't like what you're doing. And as a burn boss or a prescribed fire manager, you got to be willing to deal with those people and talk to them. And you may not be able to change their minds, but you're at least going to give them the opportunity to vent. And a lot of time, that's what all they need, is they want to talk to someone. And if you're the person in charge and you make the effort to call them, they're appreciative of that. Otherwise, they're going to badmouth you and your organization or your agency and say that you don't care. And that's a hard label to get pinned on you. So my advice to up-and-coming burn bosses or people involved in prescribed fire use is reach out to the public and get an organization built that'll help you do that, because you're going to be busy enough doing the other things that involve the project. But get a good fire education and communication team together and inform your own employees at your home unit so they can answer questions when they get them too. So that'd be one thing that I've learned, and it's been a hard lesson, but can't be emphasized enough. 2001, we had a 9,000-acre fire use fire in the Illilouette Basin of Yosemite National Park. And in mid-August, the fire really started showing some large growth and consequently putting up quite a bit of smoke. And then additionally, there were several other wildfires that started happening in the area that also were putting up a lot of smoke. Well, we didn't want to put this fire out, but Yosemite Valley, which is a major tourist destination, was starting to see the impacts, and it was really starting to degrade the airshed in the valley. The decision was made to line the western half of this, at that point it was probably about 6,000-acre fire. And the crews went out there with minimal support. You know, they got a helicopter in every 3 days of food and water. But they were pretty much left on their own to line half of a 6,000-acre fire. And they got this line in halfway around the 6,000 acres in about 3 days, which was some great work by about 35 folks. And it really did mitigate the smoke. By Labor Day weekend, Yosemite Valley was clear, and everybody was happy.
Why did it work so well? How was it that worked out?
Well, we had a combination of outside resources as part of the contingency of crews, and then we had a lot of our local resources who really knew the lay of the land. So on the ground, they were able to find the natural barriers pretty quick for the folks that weren't familiar with the area. And having that combination of the local knowledge as well as the horsepower from outside really worked well. There was good synergy, and we supported the troops well with logistics, and that kept them pretty happy and productive. They weren't sitting at hill spots waiting for water and food for a day or two. They always had enough to keep on going.
I think every burn boss at some point in their career either gets bailed out by hotshot crews. I'd like to give some kudos to a couple of hotshot crews that bailed me out a couple of years ago at Sequoia Kings Canyon. And it's really the willingness just to take on the assignment and to punch in a steep piece of line, fire, and hold it. And, you know, it worked well because they were shot crews. And the one thing I have learned, though, you do need, if you don't know the superintendent personally, you do really need to make your point across that it is a wilderness area, or you know, it is an area that you do want to do minimum impact suppression tactics. And I think the crews are if they're a good professional crew, they're going to adapt to that pretty well, and it shouldn't be a problem. But I would caution just turning them loose out there on fire use or a prescribed burn without some pretty clear, you know, instructions that, you know, you don't need to be sport falling and some of the fun things that crews like to do. I mean, I think we've all worked on crews too, so.
I work at the forest level as a fuel specialist, and part of my job is to kind of oversee the rest of the burning on the forest. And oftentimes the most stressful situation is with a new trainee or even a new burn boss to the forest that I haven't burned with yet. And you know, my job is to coach, but also to kind of make sure they stay sort of going in the right direction. And oftentimes, you know, I'll go down to help burn or just sort of be there, but the most stressful situation for me oftentimes is letting that burn boss make his or her decisions and trying to stay out of the way, even when I maybe am a little nervous about where that fire is going, trying to learn to just let that person be the burn boss. And even especially as a trainee, you know, trainee burn bosses, it's something you got to really learn to kind of try to let them fail a little bit, but not too much. And that oftentimes is more stressful than me burning myself. When I'm burning myself, I know who to blame if things really fail. But, you know, working with that person to build confidence, and it's also the most rewarding when it goes well. But that oftentimes to me is really the most stressful that I get.
The most stressful situations I've run into were on those, what I would call the mercenary burns, or when you're burning out of your area, you're going someplace else, picking up a burn plan and then implementing it, usually within a short time frame. Sometimes you get handed the burn plan the day that the implementation is going to take place. And in those situations, the stress level as a burn boss is probably the highest, because you're unfamiliar in a lot of cases with the people that you're dealing with for holding and ignition resources, maybe unfamiliar with all of the fuel types and those little idiosyncrasies that Andy was speaking to about, well, it'll burn through the night here, or it won't, or you'll always get those upslope winds at 2 o'clock, or those sorts of things that you don't necessarily know about because you're not from there. I guess, how do you handle it? Boy, I think handling it, you know what needs to be in that burn plan. You have to know what the elements are required to be in that burn plan and know what a good burn plan is. And the first thing I usually do is pick up the burn plan and just go through it. I look at the risk analysis, and I look at the escape fire plan, are two of the big things I look at, and of course the prescription to find out what the objectives are and and what the conditions need to be, what they're saying are hot conditions versus not so hot conditions. So I look really hard at those three things, and then I make notes on that and turn that plan back to the FMO or the prescribed fire manager, whoever that person might be, and say, look at this, look at my notes, and try to find out if you need to get a line officer signature about those corrections. I mean, that increases your stress level, but I think you can handle it by addressing the issues that are stressing you out in that burn plan. And then once I do that, I put that burn plan down, and I go talk to the folks on the field. I go talk to the folks in the field, the guys that prep the line, the ones that tried to burn it last week, if it tried to burn last week, whatever. The folks that have been out there and get that experience level and try to figure out what the lay of the land is, where those problem areas are that you're going to have to deal with as a burn boss. And I don't know that you can really eliminate the stress in that situation.
When you say that sometimes you're handed the burn plan on the day of implementation, would that be the first time you had seen the burn plan?
I don't have a lot of experience in those situations. I know what happens with the fire use modules occasionally. Hopefully not, but even if you do, I mean, as you gain experience writing burn plans and implementing them, you know which things to look at. You know where the holes are going to be in the burn plan, so you look there first.
I believe that every burn or fire use is a stressful situation, especially if you're the burn boss. You're the one in charge out there on the ground. You're the incident commander, and you know that's your battleground. That's your responsibility. And I haven't had a burn yet where I didn't feel some amount of stress.
How do you handle the stress? What do you do to handle the stress? What would you recommend to someone else?
The best way to handle the stress is to do a lot of planning and be familiar with your unit and your fuels, the burn you're doing, and be real cognizant of what's going on in the outside world. Okay, what if something happens? Do I still have resources available? And if you're covering those bases, and you have all the parts of the piece together, that takes a lot of the stress off. I mean, I'm just the kind of person, I worry about burns no matter what. I worry about wildfires even when I'm on them. But the best bit of advice I could give to burn bosses is in your burn plan, you should have a go, no-go checklist or something similar to that. And you make sure you go through that go, no-go checklist before you light your test fire. You revisit it after your test fire, and you make sure that everything you said you were going to do is there, everything's in place and working, and you're prepared. And hopefully you've written your burn plan that you can cover a lot of the expected and even some of the unexpected events that are bound to pop up.
You know, and I guess thinking about that, maybe I'll add a little bit about stress while I'm thinking about it. You know, what I've really tried to do the last few years is spend more time with the line officer, the agency administrator, whoever, park superintendent, whatever it is, making sure that they understand what the consequences of the burn are and what the consequences of the burn are if they go wrong, and give them a little idea what the chances are. Because the tendency for a lot of burn bosses, and I've done it, and I think a lot of people are, is to shoulder the risk yourself. You know, it's my fault if something happens. And it isn't. You're just implementing the burn. You've been given, you know, direction to burn that stuff. You may or may not have written the burn plan, but the line officer has signed that burn plan knowing that there's risks involved. And it depends. Some line officers, some district rangers will be out there with you, and they'll be totally supportive and say, hey, I understand it. I know that things might go wrong. It's not a perfect world, and I might have a career-ending event, but that's okay. We'll go do something else. If you don't have the people above you in the loop, and then something goes wrong, well, then the stress is enormous, because all of a sudden the first thing that the line officer is going to say is, well, I didn't realize that could happen. And it's funny, but I feel much less stressed as long as I have displayed to everybody that the worst case scenario, and then if it happens, hey, I told you it might happen, it happens, nobody got hurt, and you move on. It's like that person, the district ranger or forest supervisor or whatever, they're in that with you, and they need to be just as stressed as you, because they're the ones that told you to go burn. I mean, that's really the bottom line.
The other thing that helps relieve stress for me is I call them trusted lieutenants. And on every burn, I like to have at least a couple people, and usually on opposite sides of the fire, that I know and trust, and I know they're going to give me good information, and I know they're going to be able to handle most situations that come their way. And that really helps relieve a lot of the stress, is having good people in your organization who, you know, they may be the holding specialist, they may be the ignition specialist, they might be the safety officer, or they may be just someone on one of the crews, the crew supervisor that you know, and you know that that section of the line is going to be watched and taken care of by that person. And that really helps relieve a lot of the stress, is having good people that you can trust out there working with you.
The responsibility that comes with, you know, igniting a fire, a prescribed fire, I think tends to be somewhat stressful, especially with these days after post Cerro Grande, post Lewiston, and some of the escapes we've had that have been, you know, quite damaging to the local communities. There's a lot of liability that the burn boss faces that I don't think. I try to shield from the folks that are working for me at the time. I try to kind of keep that at my level, not their level, that kind of responsibility. But one of the more stressful situations was dealing with that fire I talked about previously, with we broke the wildfire nearby, and having to deal with, you know, when you hear structures being threatened over the radio, and people are coming to you over the radio saying, we need as many resources from you as you can give up, and facing that decision. And I think part of the question is, how did I handle it? I had to kind of take a time out, you know, for about three minutes, you know, but not like a long time, but just a long enough time just to kind of walk away and collect my thoughts, you know, and talk with my holding specialists on both divisions. You know, okay, what can we pare down to the minimum to be able to hold on to this? Because if those structures would have burned, you know, I think I would have been even a greater burden to carry, you know, that, we held on to our resources and these structures ended up burning, and the political fallout from that, I don't even want to comprehend where that would have gone. But that was a pretty stressful situation, and I found taking that like 3 to 5 minute time out to collect my thoughts and really kind of, you know, get a handle on the situation really helped me be able, okay, I've got a plan. This is what we're going to do, kind of thing. This is and run it through your subordinate, your overhead. And the operation did turn out to be successful.
The liability issues come up a couple times, and I've had this conversation with a lot of my peers and my friends, and we know of no one that's ever had to write a check because of something they did on a prescribed burn. And that's true. We get that scared, and you know, you have to be responsible. You have to be accountable as a burn boss. And like Joanne said, if you're following the plan and you're doing what was approved, you're going to be okay. And the unexpected is going to happen. When I took my burn boss class way back, they told me, you know, if you're a burn boss, you're going to have an escape someday, and that's bound to happen. And you know, even despite your best planning and that, you're going to have spot fires on almost every prescribed burn. Just how you are able to deal with those, how you plan for those, is going to protect you. And then the other thing that was told me a long time ago is we're gods when we fight them, and we're goats when we light them. And there aren't a whole lot of rewards being a burn boss, other than knowing that you're doing the right thing, getting fire back into the environments that need fire to sustain themselves. And that's kind of been a driving factor in my career, is that I worked in the suppression world for a long time, and was on a lot of fires that I saw they were asking us to put out, and I thought to myself, why are we putting this out? And I think everyone at the table can relate to that. And the reward is that you're doing the right thing, and you're going to make it easier for folks to follow in your footsteps, and you're going to make it safer for the folks that follow in your footsteps once we get those regimes back into their normal fire return intervals. Biggest rewards came a couple years ago. I was on a little 90-acre burn, but it was putting up a lot of smoke, and it was right on another major trail. We didn't close the trail because we wanted the public to have access and see the burn and be up close and personal with it. And this couple was walking up the hill through this thick smoke, and I see them coming. I thought, oh man, they're going to just chew me a new one. And they got up to me, and they looked at me through their red eyes, and they go, "It's a control burn, right?" And I said, "Yeah, it is." And they go, "Well, thanks for doing this." And to finally get that out of someone instead of, the public's starting to come around and recognize the benefits, just like the agencies had to do several years ago. And that's a good thing, if people learning to live with fire in their environments.